There is a kind of fatigue that sleep can't touch, a heaviness that settles somewhere far beneath the surface. You can open your eyes after a full night's rest and still feel as if something inside you is carrying weight you never agreed to hold. It isn't dramatic or explosive, it's quiet, it's gradual. It's the slow accumulation of countless small pressures that never seemed big enough to name, yet together have worn down parts of you that once felt steady. When people ask what's wrong, the answer rarely fits into a single sentence. Nothing catastrophic happened, yet everything feels dimmed. This is the kind of exhaustion that leaves someone longing not for disappearance but for silence. Silence from expectations that stack higher each day. Silence from the constant comparisons that pull attention away from one's own path. Silence from the act of moving through life as if on a stage, offering a performance no one remembers auditioning for. In psychology, this experience is often understood as emotional exhaustion, a point where the mind stops resisting not out of defeat, but because its resources have been stretched thin. It emerges when the energy you pour out exceeds the energy that returns to you. On the outside, people in this state often appear capable. They work, smile, manage responsibilities, and respond when needed. Yet, internally, everything feels muted, as if the volume of life has been turned down. Joy becomes something remembered rather than felt, a language once spoken fluently, but now difficult to translate. What makes this even more compelling is that it isn't only emotional. The brain adapts to prolonged stress in ways that reshape how we perceive the world. Over time, the mind begins to operate from a place of conservation, filtering experiences through fatigue. Systems responsible for reward and motivation slow. Dopamine's spark becomes faint, and that sense of inner momentum that gives life meaning starts to flicker. So when someone says they are tired, it is rarely a matter of simple laziness. It is the mind acknowledging the strain of carrying more than it was meant to hold. This is where psychological understanding connects deeply with human experience. Behind every worn-down person is not a story of failure, but a record of immense effort. Many of the people who reach this state are those who have spent years trying to hold the world together. They are the ones who mediate conflict, offer help before being asked, and continue showing up even when their own reserves are nearly empty. They have mastered endurance, yet have seldom been taught true rest. Consider the culture they move through. We live in a society that praises productivity far more loudly than peace. People are applauded for pushing through exhaustion, yet rarely encouraged for taking time to simply exist. The message becomes clear. Movement is equated with worth. Stillness begins to feel like an indulgence. And when someone finally pauses, a quiet guilt rises, as if resting means falling short. That guilt becomes part of the cycle, whispering that rest must be earned, even when the body and mind have already paid far more than they should have. The paradox is that waiting until you've earned rest guarantees you'll never reach it. Modern life keeps extending the finish line. There is always another task, another expectation, another chance to prove that you can keep going. Before long, you're running on momentum rather than meaning, unsure of what pushed you forward in the first place. One of the most difficult truths to face is that feeling tired of existing is not a sign of weakness. It is often the mark of someone who has carried strength far beyond what was reasonable. You've held emotions you never had space to process, accepted responsibilities you never chose, and tried to meet expectations that no human being could satisfy. After years of insisting that none of it affects you, something deeper inside finally murmurs that the performance can't continue. In psychology, there is a term that captures part of this experience. Anhedonia describes the inability to feel pleasure, not because sadness overwhelms you, but because the emotional landscape becomes empty. It is like moving through a world drained of color where even positive moments land without impact. This happens when the brain shifts into self-preservation. It pulls back from joy to avoid the unpredictability of disappointment. Expecting nothing feels safer than hoping for something that might not last. People living in this space often begin to retreat. The distance they create is not a rejection of others, but a reflection of how costly human interaction becomes. Even small social exchanges require energy they no longer have. Plans get cancelled, conversations grow quieter, and solitude becomes the default. It isn't about pushing the world away. It's about guarding a nervous system that is already overloaded. What many misunderstand is that these individuals are not surrendering. They are trying to survive in the only way that feels manageable. When life becomes overwhelming, withdrawing can feel like stepping into shelter during a storm. The silence may feel hollow, yet at least it doesn't demand anything more from them. This kind of exhaustion rarely arrives suddenly. It accumulates through years of emotional restraint. Each time you said you were fine when you weren't. Each moment you smiled instead of breaking down. Each conflict you avoided to keep the peace. Over time, these small acts of suppression add up until genuine energy becomes impossible to summon. That is when subtle changes start to appear. Music stops stirring anything inside you. Laughter feels practiced. Time stretches in a way that makes days feel heavy. You look around and realize that life no longer feels like something you are participating in, but something you are simply moving through. There is another dimension to this experience, often called meaning fatigue. When you become disconnected from the purpose behind your routines, existence begins to feel weighty. It's not a matter of hating your life. It's the sensation that you can't find a compelling reason to keep repeating it. The cycle of waking, working, scrolling, and sleeping blurs into a loop that no longer feels like living. Eventually the question emerges, what's the point? Yet that question is not a sign of despair. It is an indication that something within you is waking up. When the inner voice asks what the point is, it is really searching for a reason to remain present. As bleak as this moment might seem, it often marks the beginning of transformation, because the deepest kind of exhaustion is not just fatigue. It is a message from the subconscious hinting that something fundamental in your life no longer matches who you are becoming. That moment of recognition, as painful as it is, can also open a door. It suggests that something within you is waiting to be reclaimed, whether it's a renewed sense of purpose, a return to authenticity, or simply the chance to feel peaceful again. Psychology has shown time and time again that meaning itself can be a powerful form of healing. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who endured the horrors of the concentration camps, observed that people can endure almost any circumstance if they understand the reason they need to keep going. When individuals rediscover their reason, their strength doesn't return in a sudden surge, it rebuilds slowly. Exhaustion begins to shift from being a sign of emptiness to a signal of movement, the difference between being drained because nothing feels worthwhile and feeling worn out because something inside is trying to grow. Perhaps the answer isn't to eliminate the tiredness, but to pay attention to it. Exhaustion can be a messenger calling your attention to parts of your life that no longer fit. Within that heavy feeling is often a quiet truth that you have outgrown something. It might be a job that takes more than it gives back, a way of living that no longer reflects who you are, or an old version of yourself that helped you survive but cannot help you thrive. If you feel that subtle pull, that inner ache urging you to believe there must be something more, it isn't a sign of breaking, it is a sign of awakening. There is a particular beauty in this shift. People who have experienced deep emotional fatigue often develop a rare form of compassion. They can recognize unspoken pain because they have carried it themselves. They notice the difference between a real smile and a practiced one. They learn to offer gentleness, to love with sincerity, and to value truth, because they have learned the hard way that pretending does not heal anything. This is part of the paradox within the experience of being tired of existing. It softens you in ways you never expected. It removes illusions and demands that you see life without the filters that once numbed reality. You begin to understand that life is not meant to be a constant race or an endless cycle of accomplishments. It is about alignment, about discovering the places where you can breathe without performance and exist without apology. If you recognize yourself in these words, If something inside you echoes with that invisible heaviness, know that you are not alone. There is nothing strange about feeling this way. You are a human being, navigating a world that often forgets the importance of rest. You do not have to rebuild everything today. You do not need to force joy or manufacture motivation. For now, it is enough to stop running from your fatigue and start listening to what it's been trying to express, because sometimes the feeling of being tired of existing is not a conclusion. It is the first quiet step toward living in a profoundly different way. The moment you acknowledge that you're tired of existing, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. For the first time, you stop performing strength and start speaking truth. That honesty can feel heavy, almost frightening, yet it marks the earliest stage of healing. When you don't name your exhaustion, you end up trying to outrun it with distractions. You chase new goals, fill your schedule with habits, scroll through endless screens, anything that creates the illusion of motion. But deep down, what you're longing for isn't more activity, it's meaning. Meaning doesn't always arrive through dramatic change or monumental achievement. Sometimes it appears in moments so quiet they're easy to overlook. Watching the rhythm of rain on a window, hearing a song that mirrors your emotions better than words, sitting still without feeling responsible for anyone's expectations. In those small pockets of calm, your nervous system finally feels allowed to exhale. Rest becomes a form of repair rather than an accusation. As emotional rest returns, you begin to see how much of your life has been shaped by survival. Your choices, your routines, even the way you interact with others have been guided by a desire to avoid pain instead of a desire to build peace. There is nothing unusual about this. The human brain evolved to prioritize safety long before it learned to seek fulfillment. That is why a life that looks solid on the outside can still feel hollow. Safety without purpose eventually closes in on you like a quiet enclosure. There is a truth rarely spoken out loud. Feeling tired of existing doesn't mean you want to disappear. It means you want something worth waking up for. You want a reason that rises above obligation, a reason rooted in authenticity rather than habit. And what's remarkable is that this reason doesn't need to be extraordinary. It only needs to be genuine. Psychology has a term for this internal weariness. Existential fatigue describes the sense of being drained, not by hardship, but by living without direction. It's the fatigue that appears when your life contains comfort yet lacks alignment, when stability replaces meaning and routine replaces intention. Even success can feel empty if it doesn't resonate with who you truly are, and that misalignment, over time, begins to drain you more than struggle ever could. Humans aren't built to drift through routines without feeling anything. We're wired to feel alive within them. That's why people who move through this kind of inner emptiness often begin questioning every part of their lives, their work, their relationships, their values. It isn't confusion, it's honesty. It's the soul refusing to continue a version of living that no longer feels true. That realization, though uncomfortable, carries a kind of sacred clarity because it marks the beginning of authenticity. You start to ask different questions, the kind that reveal what you've been suppressing. What would my life look like if I stopped performing for approval? What choices would I make if I weren't afraid of disappointing anyone? What if calm mattered more than constant productivity? And suddenly, the exhaustion you've been feeling starts to come into focus. It wasn't a failure of strength. It was a quiet rebellion against a life that didn't align with your inner reality. One of the insights people often miss is that energy isn't fueled solely by sleep or food. Energy comes from alignment. When your choices match your values, you feel lighter. When they don't, even the smallest tasks can feel unbearable. It's the reason you can work long hours on something that matters to you and still feel grounded, while a short stretch of work that goes against your nature leaves you drained. The body responds to the truth of the soul. So what does someone do when they feel this level of fatigue? The answer isn't to redesign your entire life all at once. It begins with small acts of honesty. Start noticing what depletes you. Start noticing what restores you. Maybe certain conversations leave you empty. Maybe your routine has become too tight to breathe in. Maybe the version of yourself that keeps holding everything together is the one that needs rest the most. Once these patterns become visible, you can begin letting them go in quiet, deliberate ways. Healing rarely looks dramatic. It's a subtle returning to yourself. And somewhere along that process, you realize the world never demanded flawlessness from you. That pressure came from within, built from fear that if you slowed down for even a moment, you'd fall behind. But behind whom? Behind what? No one is moving through life with perfect clarity. Everyone is searching for small reasons to keep going. The moment you stop measuring your pace against someone else's path, you begin to understand that peace was never tied to achievement. It has always been tied to acceptance. There's something transformative about acknowledging your exhaustion without shame. It changes the way you relate to yourself. Instead of pushing harder, you begin listening more carefully. Instead of wondering what's wrong with you, you start asking what your mind has been trying to express. And gradually, that question becomes the quiet bridge back toward feeling alive again. You begin to rediscover a sense of wonder, not the dramatic kind that feels like a movie scene, but the quiet kind that slips into ordinary moments. The way morning light softens the edges of your room, the familiar scent of coffee drifting through the air, the feeling of recognition when a song seems to understand you better than words. These small details become anchors, gently reminding you that a meaningful life doesn't need to be spectacular. It simply needs to be experienced. What's striking is how easily we forget how to feel. As we grow older, we're trained to analyze everything, to optimize every minute, to keep producing. Yet no one teaches us how to feel deeply without rushing to fix ourselves, to sit with sadness without treating it like a problem, to welcome joy without waiting for it to disappear. People who grow tired of existing often drift away from that natural emotional connection. The numbness isn't a lack of care. It's the result of caring so intensely for so long that the heart finally shields itself. The path back isn't found through tighter control. It comes through allowing yourself to be human again, through letting the tears fall even when you don't have a logical reason, through resting without apologizing for it, through admitting that you don't need every answer right now. There is a quiet strength in stopping long enough to breathe and beginning again from a place that feels honest. Research in positive psychology has shown something remarkable. People who intentionally create small moments of awe tend to report greater satisfaction and reduced burnout. Awe can be as simple as staring at a star-filled sky, listening to a piece of music that stirs something old inside you, or writing a letter to the version of yourself who once dreamed fearlessly. These moments reconnect you with the very experience of being alive. They remind you that existence still holds weight and that your presence still matters. And maybe that is the understated miracle contained within the feeling of being tired of existing. It strips your life down to what's essential. It removes the noise, the expectations, and the roles you thought you had to play. It invites you to rebuild not a flawless life, but a sincere one, shaped by what feels real rather than what looks impressive. A life shaped by what truly sustains you begins in small, honest shifts. So if you're in a season where even the simplest tasks feel heavy, where one day blends quietly into the next, remember that this doesn't mean you're falling behind. It doesn't mean something is wrong with you. What you're experiencing is a call to reconnect with yourself. Your exhaustion isn't a flaw, it's a form of direction. It's pointing you towards something more genuine, whether that's slowing down, telling the truth you've avoided, or rediscovering a sense of purpose you didn't realize you'd misplaced. When that reconnection begins, even softly, the world takes on a different tone. Colors feel a little more alive. Music lands a little closer to the heart. You find yourself laughing again, not because life has suddenly become perfect, but because you've stopped demanding perfection from yourself. That quiet acceptance becomes the ground where a more authentic kind of living can grow. There will still be days when the heaviness returns. That's part of being human. Days when you question your path, or wonder whether you're moving in the right direction. But now you'll understand what the feeling is trying to communicate. It isn't a sign of collapse. It's a signal that you are someone who experiences the world with depth. Someone who reflects, who senses, who refuses to live on autopilot. and there is strength in that. Maybe feeling tired of existing doesn't mean you failed. Maybe it means you finally paused long enough to see that life isn't meant to be tolerated. It's meant to be inhabited with awareness. That moment of stillness, that breath, that recognition of your own inner landscape might be the beginning of everything you've been quietly seeking.